Story 6. This story is from Gulistan, a book of Sheikh Saadi Sherazi, and the University of Professional Studies is presenting a summary of story with its relevance with real-life events. The story tells of a Persian king who oppresses his people to such an extent that they start to emigrate and escape his tyranny. The king's oppression leads to a decline in the kingdom's resources, leaving the treasury empty and making the kingdom vulnerable to enemies. The king's vizier reminds him of the story of Faridun, who became king with the help of the people who gathered around him out of attachment. The vizier advises the king to practice munificence and clemency to win the loyalty of the people and build an army, which is the means of forming a kingdom. However, the king ignores the advice and orders the vizier to be confined in a dungeon. Later, the king's uncle's sons rise in opposition, and a host of people who suffered under the king's tyranny gather around and support them until they dethrone the king and establish themselves as rulers. The story teaches us that a king who tyrannizes over the weak will find his friend a bitter foe in the day of hardship. It is important for a ruler to practice kindness and humanity towards his subjects, as it is the duty of a king to ensure the welfare and security of his people. The message of this story is relevant to real life, where we see that leaders who are tyrannical and oppressive towards their people often face rebellion and opposition. The story emphasizes the importance of practicing fairness and kindness towards one's subordinates, which can lead to their loyalty and support in times of need. In contrast, those who rule through fear and oppression are likely to face resistance and rebellion from their people, leading to the downfall of their regime. Story 7. The story of Hormuz, son of Nushirwan, tells of a young prince who, despite finding no fault with his father's ministers, ordered them into confinement. When asked about his actions, Hormuz explained that he did not trust his ministers and feared that they might conspire against him. He followed the maxim of philosophers to stand in awe of those who stood in awe of him, even though he could easily overpower them. The lesson from this story is that it is important to recognize the power dynamics in any relationship and to not take the loyalty of others for granted. In real life, this story can be related to situations where a leader, such as a manager or CEO, may feel threatened by the competence or popularity of their subordinates. In such cases, it is important for the leader to recognize their own insecurities and not resort to actions that undermine the trust and loyalty of their team. Just as Hormuz's actions ultimately led to his downfall, a leader who fails to appreciate and empower their team may find themselves isolated and vulnerable in times of crisis. Story 8. The story is about an Arab king who, in his old age, is on his deathbed and receives news of a military victory. However, instead of being happy about it, the king laments that his life has been wasted in pursuit of power and that he has nothing to show for it. He realizes that all the power and wealth he had amassed in his lifetime cannot save him from death. This story relates to the real-life event of the death of Alexander the Great, who conquered much of the known world in his youth but died at the age of 32. Despite all his conquests, he was unable to escape death, and his vast empire quickly fell apart after his passing. The story illustrates the fleeting nature of power and wealth and the importance of living a meaningful life beyond the pursuit of material possessions. It serves as a reminder to focus on what is truly important in life and to make the most of the time we have. Story 9. The story is about a man who spent a year praying at the tomb of John the Baptist at the Mosque of Damascus. While he was there, an unjust Arab prince arrived on a pilgrimage and asked for his prayers and blessings. The man responded by urging the prince to be just and have compassion for his subjects. He reminded the prince that all human beings are interconnected and that if he did not do justice for his subjects, there would be a day of reckoning. The message of the story is that justice and compassion are important virtues for a ruler to possess. In real life, this story can be related to many events where rulers have oppressed their subjects and caused great harm. The story reminds us that rulers who do not show compassion and justice towards their subjects will ultimately face the consequences of their actions. For example, we can relate this story to the Arab Spring revolutions that occurred in the Middle East and North Africa in 2011. The Arab Spring was a series of protests and uprisings against authoritarian rulers who had been in power for decades and had oppressed their people. The story reminds us that rulers who do not show compassion and justice towards their subjects will ultimately face the consequences of their actions. Story 10. The story tells of a dervish who was asked by a tyrannical ruler to offer a prayer for him. Instead of offering a traditional blessing, the dervish prayed that God take the ruler's life. The ruler was taken aback and asked the dervish why he would pray for such a thing. The dervish explained that the ruler's oppressive actions were not sustainable, and that it would be better for him to pass away than to continue to tyrannize over his subjects. This story serves as a reminder that power and authority come with great responsibility, and that those who abuse their positions will ultimately face consequences. It can be related to real-life events where leaders or people in positions of power abuse their authority and mistreat those under their control. The story reminds us that such behavior is unacceptable and ultimately self-destructive. It is better to use power for good and to benefit others rather than to use it to oppress and harm. Story 11. This story is about a conversation between an unjust king and a holy man. The king asks the holy man what is more excellent than prayers, to which the holy man responds that it would be better for the king to remain asleep until midday, so that he would not afflict mankind during that time. The story then transitions to the narrator's observation of a tyrant who was sleeping at noon, and the narrator reflects that the tyrant is better off asleep because his wakefulness leads to mischief. The message of the story is about the harm that unjust rulers can cause. The holy man's response to the king suggests that the king's very existence is a burden on society, and that his absence would be preferable to his presence. Similarly, the narrator's observation of the sleeping tyrant implies that the tyrant's wakefulness leads to harm and chaos, and that his sleep is a reprieve from that harm. In real life, this story can be related to the importance of good governance and just leadership. Leaders who prioritize their own interests over the interests of their citizens can cause great harm, and their absence may be preferable to their presence. The story can also be related to the idea that sometimes, inaction can be better than action, especially when the action would cause harm. Story 12. The story tells of a king who is enjoying himself in a state of drunkenness and carelessness, not thinking about the welfare of his people. A dervish outside reminds him of his responsibility to his subjects, and the king donates a large sum of money to him. However, the dervish squanders the money quickly and returns to beg for more. The king becomes angry and refuses to help him again, leading his ministers to suggest that the king should have been more cautious in his generosity and should have provided the dervish with his needs in smaller installments. This story highlights the importance of responsible and measured generosity. It also shows the dangers of recklessness and carelessness in one's actions. In real life, this story can be related to the idea of government aid and welfare programs. While it is important to help those in need, it is also important to do so in a way that promotes self-sufficiency and prevents dependence. It is necessary to strike a balance between generosity and practicality to ensure the long-term success of aid programs. Story 13. The story tells about a king who was lenient with the peasants in collecting taxes but strict with his soldiers in paying their salaries. When a powerful enemy appeared, the soldiers abandoned the king on the battlefield because they were not paid. One of the narrator's friends who was among the soldiers explained that the reason they left was that they were not paid their dues. The story teaches that paying soldiers well is crucial in ensuring their loyalty and willingness to fight for their country. The same can be applied to any organization or company where employees need to be compensated adequately for their work to perform efficiently. When employees are not paid well or on time, it may lead to dissatisfaction and lack of motivation, ultimately resulting in poor performance or even leaving the organization. Thus, it is essential to ensure fair compensation to retain and motivate employees. Story 14. The story is about a vizier who was dismissed from his position and found solace in a fraternity of dervishes. When the king offered to reinstate him, the ex-minister refused, saying that it is better to be out of office than in it. He then gave an analogy that the homai, or phoenix, is honored because it feeds on bones and harms no living creature. The story concludes with a tamsil, or application in point, about a lion provider who chooses to stay at a safe distance from the lion, despite being grateful for its protection, to avoid the risk of harm. The message of the story is that it is better to stay away from the fickle nature of those in power, as their whims and moods can change in an instant, and it is wiser to maintain one's own character than to pander to those in positions of authority. This message can be applied to real-life situations, such as in politics, where those in power may make decisions that can affect people's lives. It is important to stay vigilant and aware of those in positions of authority and not to blindly trust them. At the same time, it is essential to maintain one's integrity and not compromise one's beliefs to gain favor with those in power. Story 15. The story is about a man who complains to his friend about his poverty and the burden of having a large family. He suggests that he should move to another country and start anew. His friend advises him against it, citing the risks and uncertainties of such a decision. The man insists that he has the skills and integrity to succeed and that he fears only the envy and malice of his rivals. The friend, however, cautions him that even the most righteous and upright person can fall victim to false accusations and slander, and that it is better to seek contentment than to chase after worldly success. This story can be related to real-life situations where people face similar dilemmas. Many people feel that they are stuck in difficult circumstances and that the only way to improve their lives is to make a drastic change, such as moving to another country or pursuing a high-paying job. While such options may seem attractive, they often come with their own set of risks and challenges. It is important to consider all factors before making a decision and to be prepared for any potential consequences. Additionally, the story highlights the importance of integrity and the need to stay true to one's principles, even in the face of adversity. Story 16. The story is about a narrator who was a member of a pious and disciplined fraternity, which had gained the respect and endowment of an esteemed prince. However, due to the indiscretion of one member, the prince withdrew his support, leaving the narrator and his friends without funding. The narrator attempts to visit the prince to plead for the reinstatement of their support but is turned away by the porter. Eventually, with the help of the prince's attendants, he gains an audience with the prince. The narrator shows humility and respect, which impresses the prince. He convinces the prince to reinstate their support by highlighting the importance of forgiveness and understanding the imperfections of human nature. The story's message is about the importance of humility, respect, and forgiveness in personal and professional relationships. The narrator's respectful behavior and humble approach in the face of rejection allowed him to gain the prince's favor, ultimately leading to the reinstatement of support. Similarly, in real life, showing respect and humility in difficult situations can help us gain respect and support from others. It also emphasizes the idea that everyone makes mistakes, and forgiveness is necessary to move forward and build strong relationships. Story 17. The story tells of a prince who inherited immense wealth and used it generously to benefit his people. A narrow-minded courtier advised him to save his wealth for a rainy day, but the prince rebuked him, saying that he was given this wealth to enjoy and spend, not to hoard. The message of the story is that generosity and munificence are essential for a great name and reputation, and that wealth is meant to be used and enjoyed, not hoarded. This story can be related to real-life events where individuals or companies hold on to their wealth, refusing to use it for the benefit of others. This can lead to negative perceptions and reputations. On the other hand, individuals or companies who use their wealth generously and for the greater good are often admired and respected. The story encourages people to be generous and to use their resources wisely for the betterment of society. Story 18. This story is about the importance of being fair and just in small matters to prevent the growth of oppression in society. The king Nushirawan is depicted as a wise ruler who recognizes that even small acts of injustice can have far-reaching consequences. When his servants go to fetch salt, he reminds them to pay a fair price and not take it by force, as doing so could set a precedent for future acts of oppression. This message is relevant in many real-life situations, particularly in politics and governance. Many corrupt and oppressive regimes have started with small acts of injustice, which were allowed to grow and accumulate over time. For example, a politician who accepts a small bribe may eventually become embroiled in larger corruption scandals. Similarly, a government that ignores the rights of minority groups may eventually become more authoritarian and repressive. Therefore, it is crucial to uphold justice and fairness in all situations, no matter how small they may seem. Story 19. The story is about a revenue collector who would forcefully take away the huts of the peasants to enrich the treasury of the sovereign. However, the king came to know about his nefarious conduct and put him to death. The story emphasizes the importance of treating fellow human beings with kindness and compassion, as cruelty and oppression can ultimately lead to one's downfall. In real life, this story can be related to the concept of corporate social responsibility, CSR, where companies are expected to consider the impact of their actions on society and the environment. It is important for businesses to treat their employees, customers, and other stakeholders with respect and fairness, and not prioritize profits at the cost of their well-being. Companies that prioritize CSR tend to be more successful in the long run, as they earn the trust and loyalty of their customers, employees, and the community they operate in. On the other hand, companies that prioritize profits over social responsibility may face backlash from the public, leading to negative impacts on their reputation and profitability. Story 20. This story tells of a man who sought revenge against another who had wronged him, but was unable to do so until an opportunity presented itself. The message of the story is that revenge is not always the best course of action, and that it is important to wait for the right moment to take action. This message can be applied to many real-life situations, particularly in situations where someone has wronged you or treated you unfairly. It is important to remember that revenge often only leads to more problems, and that it is better to wait for the right opportunity to take action in a more productive way. In many cases, this might involve seeking legal or other professional help rather than taking matters into your own hands. Ultimately, the lesson of the story is that patience and prudence are often the best tools for achieving justice and resolving conflicts.